Good afternoon, everyone. So today I'm going to do a presentation on narrative intervention as one of the chosen topics for this week's submission. So narrative intervention, to begin with, is a concept where it focuses on improving a child's storytelling ability, including the ability to provide context for the listener, use narrative structures such as story, grammar, to organize events, and utilize microstructure, for example, syntactic complexity, temporal and causal conjunctions, coordinating conjunctions, elaborated phrases, and adverbs in order to enhance the clarity of the narrative. It can provide a naturalistic means of targeting specific language difficulties. This was all part of a statement on the ASHA.org website. So that's what narrative intervention is. So you may ask, who do we provide the narrative intervention? Well, to begin with, we can do this with children who have language impairments, specifically those who have difficulty strategically processing the text. They have delays in their pre-reading skills, such as general oral language, vocabulary, and phonological skills. This could be also for children who have difficulties with literal and inferential language, grammar, of course, and then specifically the non-conversational text. And lastly, telling stories. As a society, we do tell stories quite frequently, whether we did something earlier this morning, later in the afternoon, or what did we do at school. So narrative is a very integral part, I feel, as a society that we do frequently in communication. So naturally, it'd be a good idea to teach children how to do a good narrative. What details the structure, how do you start, what's the middle, and what's the end. So the theory behind narrative intervention goes along the lines that narrative comprehension is critical for cognitive development and early literacy. It also is based on the idea that it's a conceptual bridge to reading comprehension. Not to mention that comprehension strategies can be taught effectively to young children. The idea that we read children early on, since at the age of, the early intervention stages, we usually grab a book and we read aloud to them. Even though they may not be reading it, they're still being exposed to the text, the way the letters look, and they're getting an example of how language works, at least through a narrative context. More importantly, working with narratives and literacy is our business. And that's literally word for word, which was stated in the ASHA statement of 2001. Working with narratives and literacy is our business as SLPs. Can't argue with that. And then, of course, like I mentioned before, parents can model and they scaffold the development of narrative skills in young children, which they can later apply that independently as they grow older. Now, narrative intervention can take on various forms. And you can, hopefully by the end of this presentation, you can probably make your own adaptations for it. There are several providers that you can look online who have certain structures on how narrative intervention works. There's companies such as Bilinguistics, which caters towards a bilingual population. There's the Story Grammar Maker. And then the last one that I found out is Story Champs, which is the model I'm going to be presenting on today. And hopefully, after you've seen the demonstration of how Story Champs works, you could probably make some modifications of your own and adapt the same stylings and the theory behind narrative intervention. So, what is Story Champs? Well, the idea with Story Champs is it's a multi-tiered language intervention curriculum meant to help educators and clinicians that promotes academic language of diverse students. So the idea is that it's designed for schools, that have a school team made up of general and special educators to use within the RTI, or otherwise known as the Response to Intervention, or MTSS, the multi-tiered systems of support. So the idea is that a classroom teacher will use a group setting with a special educator. In this case, us, speech-language pathologists, will be the ones helping to deliver small group or individual lessons with the curriculum of Story Champs. So what is the mechanics behind Story Champs? Well, the idea is you're supposed to tell the story by providing illustrations. They'll have simple figurines for the child to follow along as you read the story. That gives the child exposure to how the story develops. Haven't you noticed those little icons that are underneath each picture? Well, each icon represents a certain symbol, and there's a specific meaning behind it, which I'll go into in the next part. So here we are again. On the left side, you can see that there's a little purple circle with a little man in there. That's the character symbol. So when the child sees this underneath the figurine, this tells them that this is the main character of the story. The one to the right, orange house, is basically telling the child that this is the setting, and so forth. As you can tell, each symbol has a little label underneath it. The upside down thumb is the problem or the conflict of the story. The heart with a tear in the middle is how the character felt. The ones that I'm going to focus on are the ones that I named, also including the little star that has the action symbol, and the one on the near end with the thumbs up. That's the ending. Those are the ones that I'm going to focus specifically in this presentation. Obviously, you can use a lot more depending how complex your story can be. Now, for simplicity purposes, I'm using a figurine that only entails roughly 5 illustrations. Eventually, once if you're working with more complex language structure, you can always lengthen your story, and then you can add more elements to it as you see fit. So, for example, here we have 5 illustrations, as you can tell, each one with their labeled symbol. So let's go ahead and see this story. Timmy was riding his bike one day, and he ran into a rock. Timmy fell off his bike and he hurt his knee. When he hurt his knee, he went back home to tell his mom that he hurt himself. Upon hearing this, his mother went ahead and fixed him and put a band-aid on his knee. So as you can see, each part of the story has a specific structure. We have the main character, Timmy. We have the problem, where he hit the rock and fell off the bike. The feeling, he was feeling upset and sad because he got hurt. And then, of course, the action, which was he went home to tell his mother that he scraped his knee. And then the ending was the result of how he felt after he took action. So, at this point, you have read the story to the children with the illustrations or the symbols underneath one. At this point, you can hand out the individual visual icons to each child in your group. So, for example, you can hand out the character card to one child, the problem or the action or feeling to one child. So for this purpose, let's say you ask one child who has the character icon. You can ask the child to later place the icon to where it corresponds to the story and ask to retell the story. If they're having difficulty to get started with the story, you could always use a closed phrase, such as, Timmy was a bike. So you can always leave a little space for them to fill in the action that took place in that moment of the story. Timmy was riding a bike. In this case, more specifically, if you want to focus on the character icon of who the main character is about, you could say, blank was riding a bike. Once the child says the name, Timmy, then you can say, that's right, Timmy was riding a bike. Now, as you go on through the group setting, you'll have gone through this for every single part, the character, the problem, the feeling, the action, and then the ending with each child. Once each child has correctly labeled, later you can move on to another segment that's called the story sticks. Story sticks is basically the same illustrations of the icons with popsicle sticks. So you attach a popsicle stick with the symbol, like the character, the problem, the feeling, the ending, and so forth. And you assign it to each child, except you choose one child to be the narrator at this point of the story. They're the ones who's going to start the story, and then they'll be the ones who's going to be developing. So for example, if you call on one child to retell the whole story, for example, oh, Johnny, would you mind telling us the story? So Johnny will start, oh, Timmy. When he says Timmy, you'll then prompt the children, oh, who's the character of our story? And then all the children will hold up the popsicle stick that has the character. The idea is that the constant reinforcement of the different elements of the story will help stick with them, and they'll be able to retell the story a lot easier. And you do this for every segment of the story. So after he's named the name of the character Timmy, he can move on to later to the problem. For example, he was riding his bike one day when he ran into a rock. Then everybody can hold up the problem symbol, and so forth. So the idea is repetition, participation, and then repeating the entire story in different segments. Now, for example, after you've done through all that exercise with the popsicle sticks, you can do another exercise where you'll choose another child, not the one who was just telling the story, but someone else from the group, and ask them, can someone tell me a story that's related or similar to the one that we just heard? So for example, you can ask, oh, let's say, Alex, can you tell me one time when you went on a bike and hurt yourself? So the idea now is to have a self-reflection or a personalization as a way to associate the given story. That way the child can now figure out, oh, I read a story about Timmy who rode his bike one day. That reminds me of the time when I rode a bike one day. So the idea is that you're associating now with an actual concrete example. So for example, if the child has difficulty again, you can proceed using the closed phrase. I went riding on my, and then they can replace it with whatever. It doesn't have to be a bike in this case. Let's say I went riding on my skateboard, or I went riding on my scooter, or I went riding on my tricycle. The idea is that it's going to be a similar structure, but this time they're the ones who's telling their own story based on the one that they just read. And you can continue the prompting of the story by asking, okay, what happened next? What was the problem, right? They could say, oh, I was riding my scooter one day when I ran into a rock, or I went over a bump. The idea is that the structure is very similar to the main story, but you're just helping them along with it. And you keep doing this until you touched upon every part of the story. The character, the problem, the feeling, the action, and the ending. So why don't we go ahead and take a look at a video example. This example, I'll leave a link down below for you to follow. I'm only going to show a short segment of the video. In this video, you'll see basically the concept that I touched upon, except you only see the ones where she tells the story. The person in the video, the teacher or the SLP, I should say, will be telling the story. Once she's told the story, she's going to hand out later icons to every child, and then she's going to ask who has the character, or who has the feeling symbol, or who has the ending, and each child will then label the corresponding symbols on the pictures that they have in front of them. Once they've done that, they'll go back and they'll go individually ask them who can retell the story. You can find the whole video in the details below when I provide the link. But so far, let's just take a look at this 3-minute video.
Okay, I want to know if you guys are ready to play Story Champs. Say yay, Story Champs.
Yay, Story Champs.
All right, then we are ready. Ready to roll. Remember, the first part, Miss Trina gets to tell the story first, okay? So everybody listen carefully. And I've got stamps for my good listeners. Yes, all right, here we go. Here's the story right here. After school, Tyrell went to the park with his mom. Tyrell is our character. See him right there?
He's gonna get in the mud.
Let's find out. When Tyrell came down the slide, he landed in a big mud puddle. Uh-oh. That's his problem. That's right, very nice. Tyrell was really mad because he was all dirty. You see his face? He was really mad because he was all dirty. Tyrell ran to his mom and said, I want to go home. That's our action. And this over here was his feeling, right? He was mad. And his action, he said to his mom, he ran to his mom and said, I want to go home. His mom took him home and gave him a bath because he was dirty. Then Tyrell put on different clothes and was all clean. And that's the ending. You guys remember how to play, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Stamp.
You guys have been nice listeners. Let me see. Put your hands down. Whoa, just like this. Good. If you guys keep your hands down, the stamper will know where to find it. Very nice listening. Okay. We're going to do the next part of the story, okay? And that means you guys got to help me. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay, take one. Hurry. Take one. Choose. All right. I got the ending. Let's see.
I got the ending.
You got the character, Kaiden. You go ahead and start. Start telling this part of the story, okay? Do you remember his name? Tyrell.
Tyrell, he went to the park.
Very nice. Tyrell went to the park. All right, who's got this one? Who's got our problem?
Brookie,
All right, Brooke, tell us this part of the story.
he got all dirty.
That's right. When he came down the slide, say it like this. When he came down the slide, he fell in the mud puddle.
When he came down the slide, he fell in the mud.
Perfect. She said that so nicely. Let's put that on there.
God did this.
That's right. That's our problem.
good.
That's right. It's not good. Okay, who has that feeling?
Down.
That's right. It is a thumbs down.
Me.
Okay,
This is
Trayvon.
bad, this good. And he was all dirty.
That's right. What part of the story do you have here?
He was angry.
That's right. He was angry. Say he was angry because he was all dirty.
He was angry because he was all dirty.
Perfect. Did you guys hear that? Who's got the next part of the story?
Me. They,
No, you don't. Joseph. All right. Tell us what happens in this part.
he went to his mommy. Then he was sad. He wanted to go home.
Perfect. Put it on there. That's right. That is our action, and it is Tyrell's action. He's gonna fix his problem by asking his mom to go home. Oh, that's
He's
Miss.
happy.
That's Miss Trina's. All right.
He's
Right over here, Joseph.
happy because he didn't.
Look at this. I gotta do the ending, okay? So his mom took him home and gave him a bath because he was all dirty, and
He's
then he
happy
put
now.
on clean clothes, and he was all clean.
And then he happy.
And he was happy. That's the ending of the story. Way to go. Give me everybody's hands down. I want to give you guys a stamp for that. You guys were doing so good.
Well, everyone, that was it. That's narrative intervention in a nutshell. I hope this video was very informative. Again, you can look at all the references that I've included. There's also a link that you can go into to learn about the mechanics more in detail of how StoryChamps works. Or if you'd like, now that you know that you have the general idea of how the system works, you can come up with your own style of narrative intervention for your clients.